Question 10, double-blind techniques should be used whenever possible in scientific experiments.
So yeah, double blind technique, to my understanding, is this idea that the researcher and the subject, whoever is getting the treatment, does not know whether or not they have the placebo or the actual treatment. It's a way to make sure there's no like confounding variables of like a placebo effect, or to make sure the placebo effect is not responsible for whatever change. However, you don't need to know that to know what this is saying. All that they're saying there is we have this technique and we should use it as much as possible. To which my question is why? Is this actually the best thing to do? What if there's a triple blind technique that's even more effective? Or what if blindness has some issue to it? Like, what if it's crazy expensive and that causes us to never perform any science? So I'm like, okay, maybe, but they're going to have to give us reasons to accept that we should always use the double blind techniques.
They help prevent the misinterpretations that often arise due to expectations and opinions that scientists already hold. And clearly, scientists should be extremely diligent in trying to avoid such misinterpretations.
So yeah, now they give us the reason, which is they help prevent bias. They're making sure that the scientist's personal beliefs and views about the world do not seep into their science, which is good. I am wondering, is that the only relevant factor? What about the cost? What about, I don't know, there could be other issues. Like, what if the subject now introduces their bias somehow? So I'm like, this seems like good evidence, but it's not perfect evidence. There are still little holes in this argument that we could squeeze a wedge in and really pull on if we wanted to attack it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's sort of more so, in a way, just kind of explaining how double-blind techniques are helpful and advantageous, which I think arguably falls a bit short of supporting that they should be used whenever, right?
yeah, because we go really strong. Our conclusion is it's not that they're good or that they're helpful. It's
Mhm.
that we need to use them always or whenever we can. There's no if, ands, or buts about it. Which that really strong conclusions where I always have hesitation. I'm like, really? Every single time? Are there never downsides? Like, what if they're like, I don't know, let's say we have a cancer trial and I am about to die of like stage 4 liver cancer. Do I want to be part of a double blind study where I might get the placebo? Like, probably not. I probably want the treatment. And so then there's like ethical questions of does this even make sense? Which maybe it does. Maybe we just have to sacrifice some liver cancer people to figure out the cure. But if I were the person, I would not be
Utilitarian
particularly
approach.
so yeah, it's like
Yeah, but you're right to point out, yeah, whenever we have a claim that just is very, very strong, that's always a bit of a, I don't say like red flag, but it's just the barrier, or the threshold that we have to clear to prove or establish that claim is just much higher, which makes it more likely that the evidence might just fall short in some capacity. All right, should we see what
yeah,
they're?
if it
Oh,
was like
yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say like if they said sometimes it's useful, I really wouldn't have an objection. But yeah, it's that conclusive statement that we have issue with.
All right, let's see what they're asking. So, which one of the following most accurately expresses the main conclusion of the argument? It's actually fairly straightforward what they're asking us here, right?
Yeah, they're just asking us like, what was the point here? Why did they waste our time? They often have a paraphrase of the answer in the argument. Like if we can identify what was the point, that's often just the answer. And I would say that this first sentence was the main point or the conclusion, which is, hey, let's use double blind techniques. And the way I know that is because we then try to justify it. When we're identifying conclusions, it's about the structure of the argument, like what is being supported by the rest of the argument. And here, our, I guess, claim is that we got to use these techniques, and then we say, here's why. So I would basically just be looking for a paraphrase of that first sentence.
Absolutely. And Ben, I want to ask you here. So, a lot of people, when they are learning the LSAT, they're taught conclusion indicators, right?
Yeah.
And this last clause, when it says clearly scientists should be extremely diligent in trying to avoid such misinterpretations, I suspect a lot of people might see this question and be like, oh, they're asking the main conclusion, and just jump straight to that clearly. Be like, oh, clearly, conclusion indicator. That must be the conclusion. But in this case, right, as you explained, no, the argument's claiming that we should be using these double blind techniques. Why should we use these techniques? Because they prevent bias, and scientists should do what they can to basically not be biased or have misinterpretations. It functions, that clause with clearly just functions as support for this claim. So this is a really great example where, you know, quote unquote, indicator language is not the end all be all and can actually sometimes backfire if we're just going to be LSAT robots in our approach.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you bringing this up because conclusion indicators are one of my LSAT bugaboos. I mean, there's many things I dislike. Like, I'm not a huge fan of reading the question first, but it's not technically wrong. I just don't think it's best. I also really hate formal logic, but also not technically wrong. I just don't think it's best. Conclusion indicators are technically wrong. They're going to lead you astray many, many times. Like, yes, sometimes therefore, or thus, or because will indicate a conclusion or premise, but there are a decent amount of questions where LSAC throws in a thus to indicate a premise, just because they know that they're going to catch up all the goofballs who have just studied a list of indicators. So
Yep.
don't look for short. I mean, if your goal score is like a 152, you could probably use conclusion indicators and be just fine. But if you're like trying to score highly, I would not be trying to like cheat your way through this test. Like, just understand it. I know it sounds harder, but it's really not. It's so much easier when you're just doing this via comprehension rather than like, oh, what's the word that indicates the conclusion? So anyways, yeah.
So yeah, we're just looking for basically a paraphrase of that first sentence. So let's see. A says scientists' objectivity may be impeded by interpreting experimental evidence on the basis of expectations and opinions that they already hold.
So yeah, that's true. We do say that. Also, that was support for our claim, which is therefore we got to use our double blind techniques. So it is there, but it's the wrong part of the argument.
All right, next one, B. It is advisable for scientists to use double-blind techniques in as high a proportion of their experiments as they can.
So yeah, that's what we say. It is a little different. We say it is advisable versus should. We say whenever possible versus as high a proportion. But these all have the same meaning. This is one of the tricky things on the LSAT is I often find myself yelling at kiddos for this substitution of terms. And then I pick an answer like B and they're like, well, wait a sec, they didn't say advisable or they didn't say as high a proportion. But this is about the ideas are what matter. And the idea here is we got to use this technique whenever we can or as much as possible. And B follows. Even though there are some slight shifts in words, it's the same meaning.
Yeah, we have to be a fine line we have to navigate on this test is understanding is the way they're expressing something, is that just a paraphrase or is it actually something else entirely different? And so here, yeah, if you should do something, it's advisable. It means the same thing. But a great counterexample in the previous question, sales of video games and rentals of video games are distinct concepts. Those do not mean the
Right.
same thing. A sale and a rental are not the same, even though they kind of loosely fall into this umbrella category of gaming revenue business, whatever. And so that I think it's a skill. I think it takes, some practice to get really strong with discerning this, but yeah, often people will fall one way or the other. They'll think everything means something different, and not realize, oh, advisable just functionally means the same thing as should, or conversely, not pick up on crucial distinctions in meaning. So we have to walk that line there.
Right.
All right. Let's read the rest of them, but B is looking pretty good. C says, scientists sometimes neglect to adequately consider the risk of misinterpreting evidence on the basis of prior expectations and opinions.
I'm trying to think if we even say that.
They
So
don't say this.
yeah, like neglecting the risk. I was like looking back to, did I just forget about that? I mean, it might be reasonable to infer. Even if it is reasonable to infer, we didn't say it, which is one, death stroke. The second one is even if we did say that, that wasn't our conclusion. So
Yeah.
two conclusive reasons.
And I love that you said, you just didn't remember if maybe they had said it and you forgot it. And what did you do? You went back to the text, right? They never take the text away from us. When in doubt, just go back and see what they said. We don't have to memorize every single thing. D says, whenever possible, scientists should refrain from interpreting evidence on the basis of previously formed expectations and convictions.
Yeah, so this is doing a substitution. Instead of saying the double blind techniques, we say what double blind techniques prevent us from doing. But that's not the same thing. That's a shift in terms. So now we're saying, oh, we should avoid doing what double blind techniques help us avoid. But that's not the same thing. And hence the shift from using double blind techniques to refraining from doing the bad thing is different. So
And E, double-blind experimental techniques are often an effective way of ensuring scientific objectivity.
I mean, we technically don't even say that. I think that's a very reasonable inference, but we don't say it. And then further, even if we did say it, it's not our conclusion. Our conclusion is that we should use them, not what benefits they provide.
Yep, I think B pretty clearly comes as close as possible to saying that.
Alrighty, and where's the Zoom? I've lost the little thing. I'll just cut this out when we edit them. Oh, there it is. It's hiding from me.